Shana Tova. When I say Shana Tova, you're supposed to say it back. Shana Tova. Thank you. So I may be the only conservative rabbi in the country who's going to try and teach a little Talmudic question on Yom Kippur at this moment, but I'm going to give it a go. Okay. So on Rosh Hashanah, and yes, I know it's Yom Kippur, not Rosh Hashanah. By the way, Rabbi Sager decided to bring the really big shofar today, right? You know, this is a Ganza shofar, right? This is a shofar. What is the one animal? What is the one animal that the shofar cannot, where the horns, that the shofar can't be made from? What's the one animal?
A moose.
Somebody said chicken. Really? Really? Come on. What's the one animal? A cow. Thank you. What's the one animal that has horns from which the shofar cannot be made? It's the cow. And why is it? Because of the golden calf. Okay? Because of the sin of the golden calf, the shofar may not be made from the horns of a cow or any of that, species or whatever it's called. Okay? And the rabbi's term for that, the rabbi's reasoning for that is ein katigor naaseh sanigor. Okay, those are probably Greek words that made it into rabbinic Hebrew. Ein katigor naaseh sanigor, which means that the accuser cannot become the defendant, okay? And the idea here in rabbinic terminology is that we blow the shofar to say to God, please have mercy on us, acquit us from whatever we may have done. And so the shofar is our defendant, right? I'm saying to God, please have mercy upon us. And you can't have something which was used in, let's say, one of the worst sins of the Jewish people, right, all of a sudden become a defendant for the Jewish people. And so the shofar, which recalls the sin of the golden calf, which recalls this pretty bad moment for the Jewish people, is not made into a defendant for the Jewish people on Rosh Hashanah. Well, this also plays itself out vis-a-vis Yom Kippur, where again, ein katigor naaseh sanigor, where the accuser cannot be made into the defendant. In our Torah reading, and later on in the Avodah service, the basic thing which we read about is that the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, goes into the Holy of Holies and says God's holiest name, and through all of this elaborate ritual attains atonement for the Jewish people. And the rules are, this is a very elaborate ritual. There's a lot of changing of clothes and a lot of different uniforms and going to mikveh and coming out and all this stuff. But the one rule is that the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, the uniform, which actually have gold on them, right? Because gold is certainly it's valuable and it symbolizes, how precious it is and how precious the mitzvot are. The one rule, though, is that the Kohen Gadol may not wear gold clothes, any gold on the clothing, when going into the Holy of Holies. Okay? And the idea, again, is ein katigor naaseh sanigor, because the gold which recalls that sin of the golden calf may not be made into a defendant for the Jewish people, and so you don't bring those clothes into the golden calf. Now, what's the Talmudic question? Okay, and the Talmudic question, and I don't know how this is going to go, but I'll see if I can explain it, is if the gold, you're allowed to wear gold clothes in what's called the outer sanctuary, okay, in the outer sanctuary, but you're not allowed to wear them inside. The question that the rabbis ask is, when the shofar was blown in the temple, you blew the shofar in the outer sanctuary. And so they ask the question, why are you allowed to blow the shofar in the outer sanctuary when you're not allowed to wear the gold clothes? Does everybody understand the question? Okay, the rabbis were very interested in things like this. If you can wear gold clothes in the outer sanctuary, then why are you allowed to blow the shofar in the outer sanctuary? Because both of them are that accuser. And the answer that the rabbis give is that the shofar, essentially the sounding of the shofar, because there's something special about it. The rabbis say it sort of recalls things, but that means that it's the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. Okay? That the sounding of the shofar is as if, right, it happens on the inside. Okay? And so the rabbis are comparing, what I want to focus on less is the particulars of the question, but just, this is an amazing moment where the rabbis compare the sounding of the shofar to the Kohen Gadol being inside the Holy of Holies. Okay? And later on today, we're going to read that it is only the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur who is allowed into the Holy of Holies to say God's holiest name. That is an exclusive club. Okay? One person, one day a year, one word, one place. But the shofar is something we're all supposed to hear. And last week, when we heard the shofar, what the rabbis are saying, in essence, is that we were all inside the Holy of Holies because we all heard the shofar. Okay? Which means that these two things have something to teach us about each other. And even though it's now Yom Kippur, I want to just think about the shofar for a moment to teach us about this experience that we're going to read about of being in the Holy of Holies. Because when we read about it, we're going to read about it, and later on we have the Avodah service, and the purpose of the reading is actually to re-experience it. And the rabbis gave us this system where, yes, in the temple it was an exclusive club. We read about the exclusive club, but the truth is that all of us are supposed to have this experience of reenacting and becoming the Kohen Gadol in the Holy of Holies, which, as they've told us, is like the shofar. So there are two things that I want to just reflect on about the shofar. First of all, the rules about the shofar are that it must be natural. Okay? Joey Weisenberg wrote a wonderful book. He's a wonderful musician. Wrote a wonderful book called the Torah I think it's called the Torah of Music, or the Torah of Jewish Music. And he writes about how there are two quintessential instruments. There are lots of instruments in Psalm 150. We read about a bunch of instruments. There are lots of instruments in biblical literature, but there are two that sort of span the range of the musical vocabulary of the Jewish people. One of them is the harp. And by the way, there's a midrash that says that the ram that Abraham ended up sacrificing at the Akedah was actually set aside right before the first Shabbat, at Ben Hashemashot, right before the first Shabbat, and that the sinews from that ram became the strings of David's harp. Okay? But the harp is a man-made instrument. Okay? You have to take the sinews and make a harp, right? You have to manufacture it. And its purpose, he writes, is to soothe us. It's to make us, and we saw this when David would play the harp for King Saul. When Saul was either depressed or suffering in some way, David would play the harp and it would soothe him. The shofar is not a man-made instrument. It's not to soothe us. The shofar is natural. There's very little that you do to make a shofar. And if you add things to a shofar, and it becomes unnatural, it becomes artificial or man-made, then, and it changes the sound, it's not kosher anymore. So the shofar has to be natural. A quick story, the Gabaim are familiar with someone from my childhood named Mr. Sofer. And Mr. Sofer in my childhood congregation of Har Shalom. His memory is a blessing. I once heard him blow shofar, and Sid, I love the way that you blow shofar. Where did Sid? There. I love the way that you blow shofar, and you shouldn't take this personally, but the most beautiful shofar blowing I ever heard was from Mr. Sofer, because it was at a time in his life, he was elderly, and he had a small shofar, and as he stood in front of the congregation, you could feel the shallowness of his breaths as he blew the shofar, and it just quivered. But it was more than kosher, because it was real. And the shofar teaches us that what is most important is naturalness and honesty and realness, which of course you have as well, right? But I remember from this moment. And so one of the things that we learn about the experience of being in the Holy of Holies, when we walk into that Holy of Holies and we imagine ourselves in God's presence, what we're searching for in ourselves is, who am I when you strip away all the nonsense? When you strip away the shame, when you strip away the pretensions and the masks that we put on, who are we? Who are we? The second thing about the shofar, that Midrash says that the ram, right? We took the sinews and made the harp of David. The left horn was the shofar that was blown at Mount Sinai. And the right horn is the horn that shall be sounded, the shofar that shall be sounded at the end of days, way in the future. And what Joey points out in his book is that shofar was created at the twilight of Shabbos, at the beginning of time, and it will sound at the end of time. And so part of what we learn about the shofar is that while the shofar sounds in this world and is of this world, it also transcends this world. And it's beyond this world. And what that teaches us is that while we can get stuck in thinking that this world is always going to be the way that it is, that we should never, ever lose hope. We should never, ever lose sight of the possibility that things can be different and that things can change. And so when we step into that Holy of Holies and we read about it in our Torah reading, part of what we are encountering is not only the importance of finding honesty in ourselves, but also in hearing God's holiest name pronounced, finding a spark of hope within us. That things can be different and things can be better. That redemption and forgiveness is possible. Shana Tova. Our Torah reading begins in the Machzor on page 278, page 278 in the Machzor.